I'm so happy to be back in the Christian worldview, essentially. And so I'm just gonna ramble a bit, I guess, in praise of my faith and how it's settled. I guess one way to put what the process has been is just I grew up in a very narrow subset of Christianity with a lot of strictures that just don't fit me, and then came out of that somewhat. Then also realized that both had some doubts within Christianity to work through, and some strictures to get rid of to make it actually authentic to me and more open, and also realized that other faiths and religions are just as legitimate, in themselves, expressions of the truth. So for a while I couldn't feel quite comfortable with saying, well, I'm just going to commit to this one, as I'm like, should I do that? Is that just gonna make me a prejudiced and a limited person? But for reasons what I discussed in the last video about vocation and the transcendent in particular, I'm basically no. So I've been able to settle where it's I, for my part, am a Christian, and I'm going to sort of take anything that I get from Christianity and from other faiths and translate that into Christian terms and use it to make Christianity better, so to speak, and richer, and the image of casting the crowns at Jesus' feet, I guess. But that's in my world, and other people have different centers from me. But on the other hand, I will fully pour myself into this because it's very sweet. I spent a lot of years being mostly tormented by scripture and just by sermons and just by Christianity, and feeling like God hates me, and by all the things that I put myself through that I thought I had to do, etc. Really being tormented by my faith. And now it's such a beautiful source in my life, and I get so much out of it, and truly it makes up for those years spent sticking it out and operating under a lot of false ideas. And I guess speaking of false ideas, I guess I'm similar to someone like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who has, to me, very much his own view of Christianity that is definitely Christianity. But also he doesn't emphasize everything that the stereotypical view would emphasize, and he very much has his own vision of things. So I guess, for me, it's sort of emerged again, or Christ, I suppose, has sort of emerged again in the church as a living and organic whole that definitely is coherent, and I know what fits and what doesn't, and I recognize that, but not so much about the side of lifestyle moral injunctions, or conservative the conservative system. I don't really care about that. And then the concept of original sin, in the sense of believing that humanity is just under this taint, and almost going around assuming that. I don't really think about it in that term either, or in those terms either. So yeah, there's just differences. But I think that's why it's important that I've been through the whole, and I suppose continue to go, the whole process of discerning, sort of letting go and picking this up and that up and letting go, to discern that what I'm taking on is my faith and is authentic to me, and that I'm not imposing on myself anything foreign. George says it's so important, like, to not believe anything arbitrarily just because, like, you know it's true, that seems ugly to you or that you're just recoil from, and not to, like, say, well, it's true, so, like, well, I gotta believe it, which I lived that way for a long, long time, and it's bad. Like, even if technically that thing is factually true, and maybe later you'll say, okay, I get that now, it's true, and I believe it, if you're, like, forcing yourself to take on this thing that's ugly, like, that's going against your own, like, conscience and heart and discernment, and it's unhealthy. But yeah, I've come to know, as Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice and know them. Definitely there is a voice of, like, the Christian spirit or of truth that I recognize. And I'm very happy because it's rough to just be floating around, man. But yeah, to me, if I think of Christianity or Christ or the church or, like, the kingdom, just, it's more of a certain presence and a certain sort of tone and voice and kind of love, and that I feel like seen by and can be in communion with a certain space, and of course the church, and if I go into a church, but a certain space also in the world, and, like, an interior space, and a certain pattern, I guess largely of resurrection, but, like, a certain pattern echoing through the world that I can pick up on everywhere. So, like, a beauty-based understanding of faith rather than primarily ethics. Although it's ties in. Anyway, one thing that I have come to more peace on, which is a great relief, is that, you know what, I just hit a point where I'm like, at a certain point, I'm watching these, like, nuns' vocation stories and, like, convent tours, and then, you know, I'm thinking about church services and, like, all the music and songs and the hymns and the scripture and everything, and I'm like, this space exists, it's open to me, I can choose to live in it, I can choose to, like, believe in all of that and cultivate a faith in it and pour myself into that and, like, live in that world of the resurrection, of the kingdom, of the communion of saints, of Christ and the Theotokos or Mary, and, like, there are plenty of real people who live their lives this, who are genuinely happy and fulfilled and not lying to themselves, and I can choose to believe, essentially, even if some people won't understand, or some people live outside of that in the cold and harsh materialist world. My feelings are valid, and I'm not going to go out and stand in the cold alone just because other people do that sometimes. Basically. Some of the things that I love in the Christian faith are, I mean, I guess the concept of, like, resurrection and apokatastasis, universal restoration, which I'm still pondering. Then also like, that Christ is all about redeeming our mistakes, failures, and regrets, which is the main problem that I deal with day to day, and also I see so much of in everybody else and everywhere else and in every, like, media. It's always, a lot of things are so much come down to that making mistakes and having regrets and like dealing with the consequences and trying to figure out who you are because of them. And like, yeah, I was just like watching on the airplane the other day or yesterday, watching the new Harry Potter movie, Fantastic Beasts one, which is not good. I didn't expect it to be good, but it's an interesting. I mean, for what it is, you know, it was something. It entertained me, and it's interesting to see how a franchise can like lose its heart in that way, which is again the narrative of the Christian fall is essentially is that playing out. So it's interesting. Anyway, I was watching that, and sure enough, one of the characters goes like, oh, you know, carrying around these regrets and like guilt from something that happened years ago, and it's like everybody listening to the Silt Versus podcast, same thing. It's like the human condition. Well, it's the human condition. So, but then Christianity is about that and redeeming that, and Christ being with us through our sin and death and bringing us out, truly healing. So I think there is a belief that maybe there can be no healing, but I think there can. Or that there can be no complete healing. And certainly in certain circumstances and spaces. And if you stay it closed enough, there can't. That's, yeah, the other thing, just there's just more depth. There's just like more love, or a deeper sort of love in with faith and with, I don't know, it just is. Having sort of seen it from both sides. And continuing to be myself and like to love the things and people that I love in just a quote unquote purely human way, versus being like bolstered also by faith. It's definitely, I can really only be myself in like my full human dignity and potential with the edifice also of the faith. And it's like really like just stepping into a safe and good space and like relief, because yeah, another thing I think in the Christian spirit is that love, and like my love and the things and people whom I love, my love is like respected and reverenced and is sacred and is not just thrown out to the winds of chance or made into just like biology or something, or something arbitrary or something that could just be snuffed out, which affirms the most central part of me and protects that, and that's quite necessary to live with hope. And then also the deeper, deeper depth. I mean, of course, by definition it is. And a lot of this is just me still working over the specter of like materialism that is still a perspective that's way too present in me, even though technically I'm like renounce it, but it's like still there. But anyway, there's more meaning. It's like so much more meaning for every moment, for the mundanities of life, for the of course suffering and like pain and just everything. I don't know, there's more light, there's more depth and more value to everything. I really crave that and can sort of have it endlessly with the symbolic patterns in the faith that can be linked into like every moment of the day and every sort of situation, instead of things just like happening arbitrarily. And I don't know, even like traveling all day, like standing in airport security and going to the grocery store and just like doing my daily work. If I'm working that into a life of like prayer and contemplation and thinking about the symbols and patterns in which I'm participating is really, yeah, value and meaning to everything. Actually, just was reading the transcript, because I'm impatient, of a Pajot video on heaven and earth, where he was talking about ascending to heaven being, not of course a literal ascent, but like climbing higher in the realm of meaning so that you become a principality and like become a light and a cause and hold much more of the lower creation and like the multiple together and become like you have a patron saint of a certain whole phenomena of nature, etc. Which I love that Saint Valentine is the saint of like engaged people and lovers and also beekeepers, like those two. But anyway, I guess that's the feeling that I get is of going higher and participating more deeply or more highly in the cosmos. And I've kind of already said this, but just like the rich symbology and the biblical or scriptural narratives and the saints and gives so much like material for me to work with in my thought and in like my writing and way that I frame things, which I'm always thinking that way in terms of narrative, in terms of images, in terms of, so it's like poetic, well it is poetic images, but even in a more integrated way, and that's like more real. And I want more of that, and I'm trying to understand the details of the faith more and more like in my own terms and in a way that makes them transparent to me. But anyway, it's just so nice to like be back in that world and able to like claim it for myself and make use of all of this that really is there. Open to me. The Bible Project and also of course like iconography does a good job of showing some of these patterns. Just, it's like a deep and really an endless source of knowledge, of beauty and meaning and strength in life. And yeah, I'm very happy. I mean, of course the community aspect too, but I'm still sort of in a life of mostly solitary contemplation right now, so I'm focusing on that aspect of it, or like that's the main aspect. I'm like, I can pray again. I mean, like, yeah, it's nice. Pretty much that. And I would say, well, like, I'm not gonna be like, go become a Christian or like deepen your faith, because it is everybody's discernment for themselves what resonates with you and like what you can believe in. Like, it's not something that can be forced. Even for me, I'm like the most Christian, or like just grew up in this and am immersed in it, and like every significant thing in my life comes through that lens, etc., etc. Even me, I go around like, oh, I don't really know. So it's a process or whatever, and not to be forced and like not for everyone. But if you are already committed, I guess if you are already committed in that sort of frame of things, there's infinite potential.